Is it actually streaming? Let's see here. Hey guys, so this was the error I kept getting over and over again because I was using OBS, and I got this error before it started streaming, but seeing as that it seems to be working fine, I am going to continue. So hope everyone was having a good weekend so far. Sorry about the wait there, and hopefully I won't have any audio issues this week too. So let's get started. I'm going to be going over the sharing service for the mixed reality toolkit today, and this is probably one of the more tricky aspects of programming in general. It's just anything to do with networking, and it's especially true for the toolkit as well, because we have our own flavor of networking stuff. You could also alternatively use Unet, and really I don't have a preference for either. I don't mind either. It's more about how much you want to spend and what your project requirements are, right? So I think that's like the biggest thing when it comes to that. So let me go ahead and open up our example project that we've been working on for the last couple days. Actually, you know what? I'll create a new one. So let's see here. Alright, so let's create a new one. I'm just going to say test sharing service. And this should be fine. And I'll create my project. So, just to keep this in mind, networking is kind of tricky. I do know a good amount of the sharing service stuff, but I am by no means an expert. But I do know enough to share anchors and things like that across in different apps. And I'll be showing you guys how to do that today. First thing I'm going to do is import. You know what? I don't even think I have the latest package downloaded for the toolkit. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Go to GitHub, and we'll go to our releases folder and grab the latest one. You know what? I'll also grab the examples package as well. There we go. And bring those in. Nope, can't do two at a time. There we go. Huh, that's surprising. There it goes. I had to actually do it on the folder. That's strange. Never used to be that way. Hopefully this doesn't take too long to import. I'll probably cut this out of the video later. So in the chat, I want you guys to tell me specifically like what about the sharing service that you don't understand, and maybe we'll cover some of those topics first, and we'll try and what I want to do is get into like what the data models are. So there's like a sync, there's like a sync object and a couple of other things that go on there where they're trying to sync up objects across the network, and essentially what's going on is it's also got object resolution. So if like two users were to manipulate object data at the same time, it would be able to resolve how that happens. So there's also some logic that goes on with that as well. It's kind of interesting stuff. I think the hardest part for a lot of people is understanding that how to spawn things, and it's kind of like the same things that you run into with Unet as well. And we could do another Unet tutorial later on. I don't mind doing both. Unet is also interesting. Looks like we're getting some errors from Unet, and there's a folder with the sharing with Unet as well, but I think that has a lot of extra stuff that needs to get removed. We'll get there at some point. Alright, so just importing the example stuff, and then we'll get started. So I guess to start, I'll go through one of the example scenes with the sharing service. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is add your sharing stage to one of your manage objects, and put in the IP address that you need. There is supposed to be a way to auto-connect to sessions and rooms that are on the same network, but I think that the discovery is currently not enabled for the sharing service currently. But in the main HoloToolkit, or mixed reality toolkit, wow, I can't believe I did that. Still talking about old things. In the old mixed reality toolkit, there is it did get updated. It's just the binaries haven't been copied over into the mixed reality toolkit for Unity yet. So at some point that might happen. I hope soon-ish. That would be great. Okay, so let's go into our sharing folder in the examples, and I'm just going to go through this first scene here and go through a couple of the things. So if you noticed, all the objects for the whole world is on a single object called this world stage. And the world stage is supposed to hold all of your other objects that are going to be shared through the experience. And it has a couple of different things on it. It's got this auto join session and room. It's got some custom messages, a remote head manager, and user notifications. A couple of these are optional, like the remote head manager and user notifications. You don't really need those. They just kind of show how to do a couple of different things. The most important thing though is under managers, you probably want to have this sharing prefab. And you can do a couple of different things here. You can put in a specific server address if you want. Like if you were to host it in Azure or on your own server somewhere and you had a static IP address, you could always put that in. Keeping this to primary is important. Right now I think anything else doesn't work or it crashes. And then also you could choose a session name and a room name. And this is not too much different from UNet in the fact that you have like matchmaking. You can have different rooms and things like that. And then I think this is to keep alive. So what this does is if you have no users in a room or in a session, it keeps that instance alive. So if people were to leave and come back, then it would still be there. And that's also important if you want to have your anchors persist as well, I believe. So I'm going to leave this off for now. Then our server port, generally you don't want to change that. It's probably going to be fine with the default values there. Same with the pinging, and I'm not really going to use the audio endpoint for this, and we'll keep showing the detailed logs on for now. So on top of that is this sharing world anchor manager, and it's just a extension of the world anchor manager, and what it does is it ferries the anchor data that you're generating over the network and syncs it up with your other users. And what it'll do is it'll say, oh, this object is relative to this point. So everything in your shared scene is going to be off of this anchor visual, right? So the anchor visual is set to 0, 0, 0. World stage is also 0, 0, but it's at 2. That should be fine. But really this should be 0 as well. I'm actually surprised that it's not at 0. I think the reason for that is so that you could see it, but you really want your anchor to be your anchors to be zeroed out. So I'm just gonna fix that real quick. I might put that back in the toolkit a little later. So this is the sharing world anchor, and this is the world anchor. So it extends off of the world anchor manager, and essentially what it does is it just grabs all the data you need for your anchors and uploads it to the server. Let's see here. Looks like I still need to update my project settings, so I'll go ahead and do that real quick. We're going to enable our sharing services here, and we'll also enable the Xbox backend as well. All right. Cool. So I'm pretty sure I should be up to date now. Awesome. Okay. So if you guys notice, I'm using Unity 2017.1.2. And the reason for that is, for right now, I want to do this like on the HoloLens. I'm not really worried about the mixed reality stuff. I do have a setup so that I can do it that way, but it's a little bit more difficult to test and run quickly, so I didn't want to have to deal with the headset and putting that on and off while you guys are watching. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. So if I go ahead and start the sharing service through the editor here, you can launch this sharing service. Looks like I am missing it. I guess it didn't download it for me when I enabled it. There we go. Not sure why it didn't download it for me the first time. That's kind of strange. Alright, so I'll go ahead and launch the sharing service, and this is important for your firewalls. Make sure you enable all of your check marks here so that it can get through your firewall. Alright, and then I've got the sharing service here, and we got our IP addresses for our sharing service. We got a local one. I think these are actually both local, and I'll actually probably take that off. I don't know how I feel about sharing that, but I think it should be fine. So yeah, so you have two sets of IP addresses, and that's something that can be confusing when you're trying to figure out exactly which one to put into your sharing stage. Generally, you want to use the one that is local on your network. Usually it starts with 192. I noticed I didn't have that, so it could be a little bit different on your network. So that's something you got to just kind of test out and try out. Could be different each time. For now, I'm just going to use the local server. What I'll do is I'll just create a new instance of the editor, and I'll be running the sharing service on 2 instances of my project. So actually, I'll just go ahead and do that real quick. I'll go ahead and copy that. Let's see here. Essentially, I'm just duplicating the project that I have open. Just copy paste in the same folder. And then, let's see. So I think I have everything set up. So let's go ahead and test this out. A lot of times too is when you start this sharing service window up, you don't want to mess with it. You don't want to give it focus. You don't want to take it away. So I'm actually going to start it again and then not touch it again. Because a lot of times I notice that if it gets focus and then unfocuses, it will cause issues. It'll crash or it won't update appropriately. Okay, so this should have automatically put me in my local. Let's see. Yep. So I should be in my local already, and it connected. And because we're in the editor, we won't get the attach anchor to be called. Which is important because that pretty much never gets called, and you don't want to upload an anchor that isn't like real data. I guess you could put some fake data in there and send it across. It's really not that big of a deal. And then we joined properly, and there's a lot of stuff here as well. So that worked fine. And I'll show you guys how to add this into like one of your own scenes here. And then what I'm more interested in is spawning objects. So this is just kind of like the brief overview of how to set it up in your project. So what we'll do is we'll create a new folder. We'll just call this our app folder. And inside this app folder, I'm going to create a new folder for scenes. And let's see here. So I'm going to do a new scene, and I'm going to start completely over from scratch from the beginning to do this. So something else that's also important to keep in mind when you're doing any type of multiplayer game or anything like that, you want to design and build your game from the beginning thinking about the networking and the sharing service that you're going to do, because essentially you'd be writing the app 2 times. So you want to have that kind of thought and mindset from the beginning. You can port a single player game into a multiplayer game, but sometimes you end up changing a lot of the fundamental like basics of your game, which can be frustrating sometimes. I've definitely had that happen before where I had issues in that kind of the same vein there. So okay, I went ahead and got us a basic scene setup, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the prefabs in the sharing And I'm going to just pull in my sharing and the manual IP config. Alright. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to also just load in the other the example scene real quick, and I just want to grab a couple of things. I'm really interested in this visual anchor. Alright, there it is. I wasn't sure if I had a prefab for it or not. Let's see. I'll just remove that scene now that I know where that's at. So I'll drag in my anchor visual as well. Create an empty object, our world position, and I'll reset this to 0 and put this guy on there too. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is just put in our anchor text. Essentially, this makes it so that it's easy for us to see what the server information is telling us when we're on the HoloLens. Yeah, it should be good. And I think one more thing I might need. Nope. I won't do persistent anchors. Oh, this is our sharing service. Or okay, yeah, sharing world anchor manager. Good. Okay, so I think we're set up. So this should work exactly like the other scene where we are connecting. Not an instance. What have I done? What am I missing? Missing this session tracker? Interesting. Don't need these open. I don't need that. I'm gonna go ahead and open this up and see. So it's coming up on line 80. We're trying to connect to the sharing service. And let's see, line 80, then 200. Yeah, that sounds right. So I bet this instance is coming up null. And I know why, actually. I just fixed this recently. It's my singleton thing. Alrighty. So I'm just going to put... let me fix this. Yeah, this is the fixed version, I thought. Sorry guys, I am gonna open up my toolkit project real quick and see if I can copy what's there currently. Okay, so what's going on is we just don't have an instance to our session yet. It just goes back to the singleton thing. Thought I had fixed that, or thought it wasn't an issue in the current release, but I guess it is. Sorry, just taking a little bit to reserialize here. So actually what I could do is look at my pull request on GitHub real quick. Just double check that. Alright. I'm just copying this whole class, the current one. And then just pasting it in here. Alright, that should be better. Sorry about that. Should fix our issue. Strange. I wonder what's different from this other scene. Let's see. So, got some managers. We got our input manager, and we got our sharing. Same here. We got the same guy. You know what we don't have? This auto join session and room. That's exactly what it is. So, and that's on our world stage. So I think that's actually what was actually causing it. So let me copy this component and we'll paste it as new on our world anchor position. And then also, I don't think we really need the custom messages yet. I do want to get into this with you, but I'm going to end up creating our own class. So we're going to be kind of creating our own class that mimics this one a little bit, and I'll be getting into that a little bit more later on. Okay, so let's remove this scene. I think we should be good now. I think it's because we weren't automatically joining our session and room that it was giving us an issue. Yep, that was it. Okay, so we are still getting a null reference, but it seemed to be working fine now, so not so worried. I think it's more of like the script execution order. Okay. Yeah, it's so frustrating. Gotta get that fixed. Okay, so we should be set now to start adding objects, right? So this is the fun part. So let's go into our, there's the SDK for all of the sharing stuff, and it has a lot of pre-made stuff that you could pull from. So there's different things like xstring, which is just the string equivalent of like a sync var string, like in UNet. And then you have all your other types as well, integers, floats, and you get arrays as well of different types. And inside this spawning folder, we got a prefab spawn manager. And this is pretty much what's going to be creating instances on each end of our service. Okay, so on your host and your client, you'll have both of your spawned objects. And we also have this spawn object. So this is a base class that you could use in your app to do a lot of the base stuff. And it has this attribute called sync data. It's very similar to sync var in the UNet, with a little bit different ways of doing it though. So one of the different things is that in UNet you have to send a command from your host for all of your other clients to get it. With this, you actually get an event raised instead, and it raises that event, and you can actually use the same variable, so you don't have to, like, I don't know, UNet is kind of strange where you have to send the command, where this one is like you just update your field variable like in line, and it sends the event for you, and you don't have to worry about it. So I'll get into that a little bit more, but you can use this sync spawned object as a base class, which is really great because then you can extend it. And if you want, if you don't want all this extra stuff here, you can actually extend the sync object, which is essentially just like the kind of the bare bones base of a lot of the sync primitives and stuff like that. So you definitely want to do the sync object. That's going to be better because at least it keeps some different things as far as like the elements that are on the object, and it has some events about when the object was changed and whether or not it was fully initialized. So those are important to remember. And let's see here. So it has a couple of different things that it knows about. So it knows about its owner, what type of object it is, and the owner ID. And all of those things also are important as well. So let's see. I'm gonna open up the other test scene here. Let's see. Yeah, sharing spawn test. And just to take a look at a couple of things here that are on there. So we got that sync object spawner, right? And it has a position, transform position where we're spawning. So that's the spawn target. That's important because then you're not just spawning it at 0, 0, 0. And you can also, you probably want this to be at 0, but if you don't want it to be, in our implementation, I'll probably make it at 0 or something like that. And I think that this has its own version. So there's also this prefab spawn manager as well. And you have to register your prefabs ahead of time about what you want. There's actually a way to do it so that you don't need to do this, but it also involves an asset server, so that's a little bit more complicated. I don't know if I'll get into that today. But what you want to do is essentially create your prefabs for your objects that you want to spawn, and on these prefab objects you got this default sync model accessor. Essentially what this does is it calls back into the sync object class that we discussed earlier, and it inherits this interface to set the sync model. And usually this is done when you're, this is done in the Prefab Spawn Manager. And the Prefab Spawn Manager as well, you may want to create your own like class or version. So you want to kind of pattern that class off of that one there. So let's just take a look at what's in this real quick. Prefab Spawn Manager. Let's see. The struct probably doesn't belong in here. So there's a base class that it's inheriting from. It's called the Spawn Manager. And inside of this is probably where a lot of the logic goes down for our spawn object list, whether we're spawning objects, our sync source, and our network manager. So it keeps track of a lot of the important things that we need when we get connected. It spawns all of our objects and registers and unregisters them as needed whenever we get objects added or removed. So this is important. We're definitely going to want to inherit from that, and then from here you may want to create your own version, but you want to inherit from the sync. From the spawn manager. Let's see here. So we have a sync spawned object. So I'm not really sure. Yeah, so this comes from the sync object. I actually think this should be sync object instead of sync spawned object. Not really sure when this got changed. You can write your own version. We'll do our own as well. So I like doing the base class because it gives a little bit more lower level finesse over what you want to spawn. So we'll get into that as well. I might have to break this up into a couple of different series, but this is really just the overview, I guess. So, and then let's see. And yeah, so we have those two important things. So in our scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably create an empty object to get all of our managers kind of organized. Put our sharing, prefab, and our input manager on there. And let's see, what else do we need? I think that should be good for now. So I'm just going to save that scene. And then kind of look back over what we need here. So we need some sort of prefab spawn manager. I'm going to write my own. And then on the other one, we probably want to get this sync object spawner. And we may want to create our own for this as well. So I'll go over that. I'll be creating custom ones for each one of those. So let's go ahead and get some of those classes just stubbed out real quick. Actually, let's create a folder first. Alright. So in the scripts folder, I'm just going to create one more just for our sharing stuff. Alright, so create a new script. We'll call it custom prefab manager. I'm sorry, custom, what are we calling this? Prefab spawn manager? Custom prefab spawn manager. Alright, and then I'll also create the other class that's supposed to be the spawner itself, sync object spawner. I'm just going to name this prefab spawner. Alright. I'll just clean this up a little bit. We probably don't need all of this stuff. Close a couple of These other ones we don't need. Alright. I really ought to just update my template. You can actually update the Unity templates. It's pretty easy to do. I just haven't had the time. I like having more of just empty nothing to start with. Some of that stuff is just filler. Okay, so we got our two that we're going to use, and inside of our managers on our sharing, I'm going to put this guy on here. And then on our world anchor position, I'll add our... Uh-oh. Does the name not match? It does not. There we go. I'll add our Prefab Spawner to our world anchor position. Alright. I want to say there's one more thing we need to do to target what our... Nope, that should be good. So the reason why the world anchor position is at the center, because when on the HoloLens at least, when you start up, the world origin is the center. And it should always add an anchor to the center, and I believe that adds the anchor to this this whatever parent this anchor text is. So it'll go all the way up to the top and add it on the HoloLens. That is, if you're in the editor, or if you're using the mixed reality headsets, I think that's going to be a little bit different. I haven't really done a little bit of the sharing service with that yet, but maybe we'll get into that, and I'll update the toolkit as we go while we look at that. So, okay, so I think we're ready to make a prefab. Let's do that. So I'll come back out into our apps folder, and let's see, prefabs. And I'm going to create some pretty basic shapes for that. Let's see here. I want the test runner. Let's do a cube, and wow, that's big. We'll reset his transform. Definitely want a collider on there, and the first thing we want to do is add our sync model, our default model accessor. Let's see, and it comes from, it inherits it's looking for the sync object, which is what we want, which is good. That's the base class, so this should be fine. You can also create your own versions, like if you want to have specific types of sync objects, depending on your need. You can also have it do that, but I like doing the base one. I mean, it's easier to grab all of the objects that way. So that's one of the other things we need, and then to make it a prefab, I'll just drag it into our folder here. We should be good to go. So let's see. I will rename this though instead of just cube. We'll do spawn object. Alright. And then I'll delete it from the scene. Don't really need it anymore. So now we can go in, we can start kind of filling out our prefab spawn manager. And let's see. I'm going to also open up the other manager as well, the sync object spawner. No, that's not it. That's going to be the prefab spawner for ours. Let's see. Pretty sure this is the one we want. So we're going to inherit from the spawn manager for our class. And we're going to do the sync object. Yeah. And then we'll just have it fill out our missing members that we need to implement. Alright. So a couple of different things that we're required to do here. The first one being the setting the data model source. And then we also have some helper functions for deleting and instantiating. Deleting and then instantiating from the network and removing from the network. So I think delete is the opposite of, I guess, set. This should probably be like create or something like that. I think the names could be better, but it's not a big deal. So in our spawn manager itself, let's see. I want to close up some of these. So it looks like these are some abstract things that we need to fill out. Let's see. Yep, so these are all abstract things that we're just obligated to fill in ourselves in our class. So what we want to do is when we get set data model source raised, then we're going to want to get our data model, probably look up our prefab and set the data model to our prefab, and then actually call instantiate from network. So what we'll be doing is we'll be raising some event that says, oh, you should instantiate it. So this isn't going to actually instantiate anything. We're going to be listening to a callback from our network to instantiate our objects, even on the host side. So the client and the host are all both going to get the same message to say instantiate your object. So we're not going to actually be instantiating our object locally in that sense. We're going to be sending our event out to the server, and the server is going to bring it back to our host and our client to spawn our object. Same thing for the removing from the network. We're going to be removing the object. We're just going to be sending an event to remove our object from the network. We're not going to be destroying our object ourselves. We're going to let this method handle that. So those are kind of like the important things to think about. So instead of just doing like game object instantiate, you're going to actually be doing the instantiation from an event that you're going to be sending out to your server, and then when you get it back, you'll be handling it that way. Alright, so let's see. Is spawner really not the right name? I don't know. It just doesn't like it. Add that to the dictionary. Okay. So in our prefab spawner, essentially what this does is it will probably somehow know about this. I'm just going to actually look in here and see what they're doing. So they have an awake function where they're looking for the spawn manager, and they have a reference to their spawn manager. So we'll probably do the same thing as well. And then they also have a transform reference for where they want to spawn the transform. Parent. I guess it'll be the parent object. So yeah, if you want to spawn it on a specific parent, if not, then it'll all be spawned on the game object itself. We could probably use this, but I wanted to rewrite this a little bit just so that you guys understand what's going on a little bit more. So inside of this, it's got a basic spawn basic sync object, and what it does is it gets the position. It creates a new sync spawned object data type. So it's creating a class there, and it's probably filling out some of the things that we need. Again, I'd rather do the sync object base because it's a little more low level, but this has some really great stuff in it actually. It has the transform of the game object you're trying to create, its name, its parent path, and its object path. Now the parent path, this is I wonder what the difference is here with these actually. So you've got an object path and a parent path. This is interesting. I wonder if one is for the path on the server, because that's interesting. I'm going to look at that later. Not really sure what exactly this is doing. So the parent path, we're getting that from here. Oh, I see. So it's the full path. Transform full path, and then the instance name is its name. Oh, what did I do? It's not what I wanted. Interesting. Okay, so this is just the parent, and then this just adds an empty value to it, and then adds that. It's not quite sure why we need both of these. Anyway, so this is probably better to inherit from. With the difference with the sync object is that if you want to get lower level, it's where you want to be. I guess for the sake of simplicity, because that other one, the sync spawned object, actually has some pretty interesting good stuff in it. I may write my own class for this though as well. So let's see. Kind of getting off track, I'm sorry. Have not looked at the dashboard in a while. Sorry, you guys are asking questions probably. So Peter asked, he's saying, on the sharing game object you have to add a prefab to the anchor text. That will fix the error. That's probably, well, that was the error I was getting before, huh? It's coming from the manual IP config, and everything was set on there, so I'm not sure if that was it. Is it on the sharing world anchor manager? Add that. Yeah, I think that was already set, because I had went in and done that, pretty sure. I'll check again though. Yeah, that was already set, so I wasn't quite sure. Okay, so let's see here. I might split this up into the next one a little bit. I'll go a little bit over today because I didn't really get started at first as quickly as I'd hoped to. Alright, so we have our custom spawn manager, prefab spawn manager, and our prefab spawner. Let's see here. I'm going to break these up into two different windows. If my window is small enough. There we go. Get in there. And I'm gonna have these side by side just to get kind of an idea of what's going on here. So let's see. So we'll probably need a reference to our spawn manager as well. This should probably be a singleton, but I think because it's using the sync object, we can't use it as a singleton type. Just frustrating, but that's okay. You just want to make sure that you only have one in your scene, and if you carry over into another scene for your shared experience, you also want to carry this guy over too. Let's see here. So I guess that's the best way. We'll just need a reference to ours as well, so I'm going to do that. Let's see. I called it custom. I'm just going to say prefab manager. And we'll serialize that because we don't need to know it outside the scope of this. And then I'm not really going to add a transform. I think for us we'll just spawn it right on our prefab spawner because it kind of makes sense. I guess we could have an optional one. If you guys want to do that, you're more than welcome. But I think I'm going to put everything all in the same place. The other thing to also think about is if your hierarchy is too deep, there's a lot going on when you get really deep hierarchies, and there is some complex code that keeps track of all of the child objects that move. So that's also something interesting. I try not to make sure my hierarchy is too deep unless it kind of needs to be, because there's a lot of math going into that on the update loop, and that can actually impact your performance on the HoloLens when you get your hierarchy has too many nested items. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to spawn everything on our world anchor position itself. Alright, let's see here. And I'll also go ahead and in my managers we will put our sharing custom prefab spawn manager. It's there. Alright. I'm going to actually kind of reorganize this a little bit. That should be fine. This should probably be like closer to the top. I'll put my directional light into here as well. Probably don't need all that. And anything that you're going to have floating around in the scene that isn't going to be networked, I would probably keep it outside of this world anchor position. Just because it doesn't really need to be in it. If you want to do it to kind of organize your scene, that's up to you. But generally what I like to do is like anything that the users are going to see that the other users will not see together, then I usually kind of separate those out. You could network the cursors together so that other people see other people's cursor positions, and you know, maybe we might do that. I might do that in a later video where we can have people see other people's cursors. That might be something that's fun to do. And then, let's see. Let's finish getting our prefab spawner ready. Okay. So let's see what they're doing here on awake. They're just making sure they have a reference to their spawn manager, which is fine. I'm not so worried about that. I know that I'll have mine set. And then if we don't have a spawn parent transform, then we spawn the object on this transform. So they're just setting up the where to spawn their objects at. Alright, so they have a spawn basic object, a spawn custom sync object, and then they have some delete functions as well. So for us, I'm not so worried about having this custom object. I'm just going to have everything come as one type, which is the sync spawned object. And actually, because I wanted to actually probably update my manager, just my custom one, custom manager, custom, you know what, I could just do this. Let's see. I'll actually go ahead and update this to be the sync object, sync spawned object. Looks like I need to update this to include those. Alright, so that should be a little bit better. We'll come back to that later. So for in ours, we're going to have some public functions, and we're going to do just spawn. And we could actually, instead of, I kind of don't like how they have this prefab thing. We could probably pass in a game object to spawn. Like, so if we have buttons that have a reference to a prefab, I'm just going to pass in the prefab that we're going to spawn. Alright. And let's see, what else could we do with this? So what they're doing is they're just creating a new sync spawn object, and they're getting the position and rotation. Do we need anything else other than that? I don't think so. We'll probably do something very similar. We'll get our vector 3 position. Looks like they're doing it from a random unit on a sphere, and they're doing like a random. Okay, so they're just doing some random stuff here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to pass in our object's position, initial position, and rotation. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that so much. So we're going to create our spawned object. It's going to be a new spawn, sync spawn object. I don't know if it like that it has the ed spawned, sync spawned. I think it should probably lose that. Anyway, let's see. And then for our prefab manager, we're going to spawn our object. I don't think we have a spawn in ours, but they have that in theirs. So let's go to ours. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do the same thing. We'll create a public spawn. If I could spell. Alright. And we'll do the same thing. We'll spawn. And with ours, I don't know if we'll actually... We do want to pass in our spawn object. And I'll just go ahead and have it update that for us. And then... we'll also pass in our game object, prefab. We probably could combine these things, to be honest. Try to decide how I want to do this. We probably pass in also a transform for our position. And then also, let's also pass in a quaternion for our rotation. I wonder if there's anything else we need to know about when we spawn. We just want to know the prefab that we're going to spawn, its position, and its rotation. And we'll pass all that over to our prefab manager. Now the reason why I want to do this is because I want to make this static. And I'm probably, oh wait, I can't do that, huh? If we make this static, we won't be able to get it in the scene. A couple of ways to get around this. I want to make this into a singleton actually, because what I want to do is be able to call this from anywhere to do our spawning. But because our spawn manager is in a singleton, I think I'm getting sidetracked here with this. Let's not worry about that for now. Yeah, I can come back and do that later. It's not a big deal. Okay, so we got our spawn. The other thing we want is, we probably want to remove it as well. I want to call it delete. Probably be doing the same thing back on our other guy as well. What do they do? Do they handle sync object spawner? Do they? Yeah, they have a delete as well. And what they're doing is they're getting their sync model accessor and off of the object that they hit, and then calling the spawn manager delete. Okay, so that's probably important to do as well in ours. So let's see. I'm just gonna call it delete. I don't think we really need anything else. And it looks like they're passing, or what they're doing is they're just, whatever your gaze is on, it deletes. So for us, I don't know if I want to do that. I think I want to pass in the game object that I want to delete. And then from there, we can start doing the things that we need. Let's see here. So with theirs is, they just make sure their object's not null, and then they grab the default sync model accessor and get the sync spawn object off of it, and then pass that over into the spawn manager delete. Okay. So in ours, we probably already have it set up. Yep, so we already have delete and to pass in the sync object. So we'll do the same thing. So on our game object, we're going to say object to delete, get component, and we're going to say the default sync model accessor. Yep. And we'll just say sync model, and we're going to want to make sure this isn't null before we try and delete it. Because maybe we pass in an object, or we hit an object that doesn't have one for some reason, so we could just outright delete it instead of going over to the server and deleting it. So let's do that. Let's, if our sync model is not null, we will go ahead and call the spawn manager, or the prefab manager, delete, and we'll pass in our sync model. And we want to cast it to the type sync model object. We should probably cast it here. What are they doing here? Oh, I see. They have to get the actual dot. Okay. So let's do a little bit more to this. So we still want to make sure that it's the sync model is not null. Our accessor. Let's rename this. Sync model accessor. There we go. So let's see. We'll grab this and we will say sync model var. That's what we're gonna do. We'll really get our sync model this time. And it'll be the sync model, and we want to cast it to whichever type. Now, because you can have custom types, like if you want to make your own version of the sync spawned object, then you can actually inherit directly from it and extend that class. But because you can extend it, you should be able to at least downcast back to this type of object. Which is actually why I wanted to use the other type, which was just this. Let's see what this guy comes from, the sync object. For some reason I feel like it would be better to use this instead. Looks like it actually is that type. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I like that. Yeah, we are going to use the sync object for this. I don't like that it's using the higher class because it kind of puts you into a corner where you have to use all of those. So for now, I think that it's better just to pass in the sync model. And this will be important later. Like if you want to create your own types of sync models, you want to always go back down to your lowest level that you want to go to. And this will be important later on if you want, when we get into creating custom types of sync objects. And I'll go over that a little bit more later on. So I think this is probably all we need for our prefab spawner. So we have our prefab manager, and it has a spawn position, or it has a public method for spawning, and we have our prefab, our transform, and our rotation. And we're going to pass on all of that stuff. Actually, we probably want to add a little bit more of this, so let's also add our position and our rotation into where we're going to be passing this over to. Oh, I don't want to overload. I want to actually just add that in. Alright, so transform, position, no, and our quaternion rotation. Alright, that should be all we need. Alright, so that's happier. I think this is done. I don't think we really need to do anything else to this prefab spawner, so I'll go ahead and save this, and we'll come back to it later if we need to. Now I'm going to move over, we're going to get a little bit more into this custom prefab spawn manager. So this is where a lot of the logic for this is going to be going down, and this is probably the more important class for doing a lot of the spawning and handling those networked objects, which is we want to do everything in this class essentially, and we want to ferry a lot of that over. So let's take a look at theirs. Let's see. So they have a list of spawnable prefabs. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually be passing in our prefab, so not too worried about that. And they have a type lookup. I'm not really sure what they're doing here. And then they have an object creation counter. That might be important. We may use this, not really sure. But it looks like they also they override the start function and initialize some prefabs. Let's see what they do here. So they are doing their lookup table, looks like, and getting the data model class name back out. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I don't know if we need to do that. So they're getting their data model class name. Interesting. So let's see what they're doing. So when they get the instantiate from network, they're getting their spawned object, and then they grab their prefab. So let's see what they're doing here. When they grab their prefab, they are doing their lookup for the data model, and then they're getting the name out. I wonder if they're using reflection. I don't know if that's so good. And then they pass back their prefab to spawn. Interesting. Not sure if I like that. I don't know if I'll do that. We'll probably do something a little bit different. Yeah, this is using reflection, isn't it? No, it's not, surprisingly. Let's see here. Yeah, the data model, get name, and I guess they use the name for the prefab. That's interesting. Let's go back into Unity and take a look at what they're doing. Let's see. So, I can see why some people get confused with this, because I don't know if I really agree with some of the stuff that's going on in these test scenes, even though I probably was the one that kind of got them a little closer. Let's see. We want the prefab. So our prefab test cube and our spawn test sphere. The names don't really line up with the things there. I noticed that this spawn test sphere also doesn't have a sync model accessor. I think they add that to the object as they spawn it. And I think in the example that they have, they actually use two different types of ways to spawn. So that's interesting. So let's look at their scene here. So they have their spawnable prefabs. Ah, see, they put the name right here. That's what's going on. So I don't know if I want to do this. I think there should be an easier way. I just want to reference a prefab and spawn it. I don't know if I even want to add like this whole dictionary lookup. It's just a lot more overhead about the things that you want to do. I think it... I just got signed out of Unity. Weird. Alright. Give me 1 sec, guys, while I sign back in. That was really bizarre. Okay, so let's see here. Where was I at? That totally got me derailed. Yeah, I don't want to have to deal with this dictionary lookup that they're doing. I don't really agree with that. I just want to be able to reference a transform and then spawn it wherever I need to spawn it at. I don't like this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, we also need some way of figuring out what data model to use, which is what they're doing. So they're trying to figure out what data model to use so that they can spawn that. So how could we do that in ours? Looks like we're passing in a spawned object here. Do we need to do that? In our prefab spawner, do we... Yeah, we create a new sync spawned object. So with ours, I guess we're going to be using the sync spawned object. I'll get into using custom types for this. But I think this is probably good for what we want, because it has all the things we want. So let me just go back and look at this class. It has a transform, has a name, parent path, object path, game object reference. I think this should be fun. I think that's all we need. I don't know if we need anything extra, so just for the sake of simplicity, we're not going to do our prefab lookup like they're doing. I think it's going to be better that we just do just spawn the prefab. We already know what our data model is going to be. It's going to be this sync spawned object. Let's not worry about that. It's just going to get complicated. And then also, if you have any extensions to this class, and you'll be able to downcast back to this sync spawned object anyway, so it should be okay. So let's take a look at how they're doing their prefab spawning, at least, right? So they initialize their prefabs, and then they instantiate from the network. Let's find this spawn, the same spawn method that they've got. So let's see here. Getting their there we go. I'm gonna actually make this bigger for now, so we can see the whole thing. So what they're doing is when they spawn, they get their data model, and they have a local position and rotation, scale. I don't know if I'm going to worry about scale. I think scale for now, I'm just going to leave at 1. We could do scale later. I should have thought about that though. I might actually go ahead and update ours in our prefab spawner. Let's also add scale as well. Vector 3. Yeah. So what's interesting is in their class they're actually doing local position, local rotation. We should probably be doing the same thing, because we're actually going to be spawning it on our world anchor position, and we want all of our transforms to be relative to this object. So we probably also want to update our naming as well to be local. So I'm just going to add local to the prefix of all these real quick. And just so we can read it, I'm just going to bring this over. And get our local scale as well. Oh, hey Renee, how are you? I just saw your thing over there. Alright, so that should be better. Let's also pass in our local scale back to our prefab manager. If I didn't hit the Windows key, it would have worked. Alright, and then I should be able to add the parameter. There we go. Okay, so now our Ours is looking a little bit closer to what we want here. So let me just bring these down so that we can read it. Okay. Alrighty, so let's go back to their spawning thing. I'm gonna bring this window back in. So look, they look for the sync source. Their sync source is, I think this calls back to the base class, the base thing here. So if I were to actually go down, yeah, it takes us back to the spawn manager. So this is a protected sync array, and really what this is for is, let's see, if I press play in here, I actually want to unload this real quick. I believe if we go ahead, I think we should go ahead and play. It should connect us automatically. What's going on? Registering our data model. Oh no, I crashed everything. Alright, well, that happens. So let me just get this going again. I guess I didn't quite finish what we were working on. So it got upset. Let's see. I'm gonna actually open up the example scene because I want to show you guys something real quick. For the sharing spawn test, when we start this up, I probably should also start the sharing service. Let's try this again. Sharing service, launch. There we go. Oh, it's already going. Why did it? Interesting. I'll just close that. This time with feeling. Failed to locate internals. That's fine. Multiple stuff in the scene. What's going on here? Multiple event systems. Interesting. Do we really have? We do. Oh, okay. Well, this scene apparently isn't well done. So let's take a look at this. We also want to get our cursor and put it in there. There we go. And coroutine couldn't be started. What coroutine? This one. I'm actually going to remove this. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to remove it, and I'm actually going to put it on our sharing stage here. It's probably where it should belong. Alright, so let's try this again. What object is not a reference? Interesting. Well, I thought I was just going to be able to show you guys. I guess this example scene is broken at the moment. Alright. Also want to show detailed logs. Should actually just update that. That should be good. And then let's get our anchor visual in the scene as well. And we'll put that on our sharing stage. Just so that we get some extra information here. Probably update this example scene as well. And I'll put this back up on GitHub later so you guys can see it. Didn't realize it was broken so badly. Alright. There we go. We should be good to go now. So this is what I wanted to show you guys. It took a little while to get here. On the sharing stage, you actually have a root object, and you can see all your instantiated prefabs under here. So it has the object hierarchy. Now the object hierarchy is the hierarchy on the server, and that's actually what you want to be looking at. So it's going to be different from your object hierarchy in your scene, potentially. It could be the same, it could be different, just depends on how you've set it up. And this is going to be more, probably more along the lines of having like a sync root object. And then from there, you can have your other elements. And this could look very similar or different from your actual object hierarchy for different reasons. Because you can have all sorts of different types of elements that you can put on. So in sharing in that SDK, I don't know if you guys saw this, we had lots of different types of elements, and we had booleans and things like that. So it could look different. You're going to see those kinds of objects in that as well. Let's see here. So I'm going to go back over to our scene before it crashed and finish working on that. I'm actually going to rename this. I don't know why I put the little e. It's going to bug me. Alright, so before it so nicely crashed on us, I think we were still working on getting our spawning to work properly. And it seems that we hadn't finished what we were doing. So if you don't finish, I guess, doing this, it will crash on you. So let's take a look at that. So let's finish what they were doing here. So they called the base start. I don't think we really need to do this. So we'll go into the thing here. So the sync source, essentially that is the root object that I showed you guys here. That was on the sharing stage when you start up. You'll get the list of your objects, and this sync source is that root of that. Alright, so we do want to check if it's null, because if it is null, then we don't want to continue doing what we're doing. And we'll do the same thing, just a log error. And we'll return, because we don't want to continue doing whatever it is that we're doing. Alright, and then they're doing some stuff with their parents, and they're figuring out what prefab to get. We already know all that, so we're not too worried. And then they create an instance name. Interesting. What is this? I think this is new for me. Create instance name. It looks like they're just creating a GUID, getting a unique app instance ID. We could probably do something like this as well. I don't mind doing this. We can use a GUID, or you can use the name of the object. I think that's a good idea. We should also do that as well. So, how are we going to do this? So, okay. For us, we're just going to say it's going to be our prefab to spawn name plus a new GUID. Yeah, I think that should work. And let's see. Let's actually use a string format for this. To kind of help with the allocations here. Let's see. So what we're going to do is, if you guys know about string formatting, you can do lots of really cool stuff with this. Essentially, you just pull in your parameters, and it kind of helps with allocations as well. Like a lot of times if you just do string plus string, you get allocations. String format kind of helps that a little bit. It actually goes down, makes it like a string builder, and does some other stuff. I like it a little bit better because you can reorganize stuff, and you can kind of see it without having these names embedded in. In the newer C#, it's actually nice because you can actually embed your actual thing in it, and you can use like a $, which is pretty cool. Doing that, which somehow works. I don't know how that works, but it's some, C# black magic probably. So for us, I think this is fine. We're just going to do a GUID, and we're going to do prefab spawn name. I think that should be all we really need. Just gives us a unique ID for our instance, I guess. And then what did they do here? So they initialize their data model, and then they set the scale and figure out who's the owner, and then add their object. Okay, so I guess we could do the same thing. So for us, let's see. What's interesting is we actually don't. What if we should have brought in the prefab here? Because really we're going to be needing the prefab later when we instantiate from the network. I'll figure it out. We'll do it as we go. So let's finish initializing our data model. So they're going to do the same thing. They have a data model that they're initializing. So let's do the same thing. So we got our spawn object, and we're just going to initialize it. And we'll pass in our instance name as well. And then, let's see, they're doing their parent transform get full path. I guess we should do the same thing since we're calling into the same data model type. I think we should do the same thing. So, their parent, how do they figure this out? Parent is null, then it's just the game object itself. So we'll just be passing in our transform. I'm sorry, no. Our prefab to spawn. We can get the full path here, can we? No. This is interesting. Oh, I see. It's the prefab spawn manager's path. So it's actually our local game object. I don't know if I like this. It should probably be our spawn, our prefab spawner, because this is where we're going to be actually spawning our objects. So interesting. Should probably be fine, I think. They're not spawning it on theirs though. So the parent, I guess, goes back to... Take a look at what they're doing with that. Where are they passing in this parent at? Okay. Spawn parent transform. So it's the transform that they're pointing it to spawn at. Okay, but we move that over into our okay. So I guess that's one more thing we need to add as well. So I'm gonna do it like right after our prefab to spawn. And let's see here. We'll add it into this as well. And we'll go down and just make sure that this got put in at the right place. So we don't want to spawn. Probably should be parent. Alright, and what we want to do is actually get our parent. Alright. We should probably add some logic about checking to see if some of the stuff is set. But for now, I know I'm going to be setting these things, so I'm not too worried about how we're going to be calling it. We should definitely require these things, and if it's null, then we want it to break. We want it to throw an error. So I'm not too worried about that. So for now, I'll just go ahead and make sure that we have that. Alright, so let's kind of go back to where they were at here in our prefab spawn manager. Go back down into spawn. And they do a couple of other things where they go ahead and set the position, rotation, and stuff like that. So let's take a look at all the things that we can set on this first. So we can set a name, an object path, a parent path, and a transform. Interesting. So it's a sync transform. So that means our object is going to get a sync transform automatically. And that's, I think that goes down into an element type. Yeah, sync transform. It's also a sync object. Okay. Okay. Alright, so that is in itself its own thing, and I'm guessing that gets initialized from the spawn object itself. So we'll go ahead and set our position, our rotation, all that stuff to be what we passed in. I'm just going to bring these down a little bit so I can read them. Let's see. We got our position equals our position, and then let's see here. This cannot be converted. Value. Interesting. Still not a vector 3, huh? Looks good. I think it's just mad for some reason. This should be a vector 3. I did not want to attach to Unity. Yeah, let's change this to a vector 3. Yeah, little things like that. Okay, so let's finish getting the rest of the spawn object. Transform rotation value equals our rotation. And that should be a quaternion as well, right? Yep, good. And then we'll also deal with our local scale. Generally, you want to leave your scale to 1. There's not often where you want to adjust your scale. That's something that you may want to handle on the client side, but we'll go ahead and do that as well. So spawn object, transform scale, and remember to use the local values as well for these. So it's going to be the local values. So let me rename these just to make sure. Local rotation and local position. Alright. Let's see here. They're doing some interesting stuff here to see if the local scale has value. I'm not sure why they passed in a nullable vector 3 type. It's kind of interesting. I think that, I guess if they don't pass in the vector 3, then they don't set it. You probably want to set it every time though, to be 1 at least. Alright, and then the last thing they're doing is they're getting the local user and setting the owner. So let's see, we'll do that as well. Do we really need to so what they're doing is so they're checking to see if the object is owned locally. Interesting. So how do they figure that out? Let's look at that. So that one's false and that one's false. So both times they're just passing in false to this is locally owned. I want to say that that goes back to whether or not the server owns it, if the host owns the object, or if the clients can do it. So it is similar to in UNet, where if the user has local user has authority. I think it's kind of similar to the UNet. It's the UNet equivalent to that. So not sure if I really want to use that or not. Let's go back into this. Oh, I think I went too far. Is locally owned. They're doing false. I guess we could also do false. I'm not really sure what the drawback to that is. If they're just doing false, we could just pass in null to adding the data model. You know what? Actually, we'll do true. So if we spawn our object, then we should own it. So we'll do that. We'll get our owner, and I guess if it's just something that they want on the server, I'm trying to think exactly what the use cases for this would be. So if it's locally owned, I wonder what that changes. Indicates if the spawn object is owned by the device or not. An object that is locally owned will be removed from the sync system when the owner leaves the session. So let's make that true. We want to own those objects, and when we leave the session, we want to be able to take those with us and make them leave with us. I guess it really depends on your use case. It's another thing we have to add to our spawn, our prefab spawner. Let's see here. We already have quite a few things here to determine whether or not we're going to spawn. I don't even know if we really need this. I think the biggest part of it is creating the spawn object for each type. Interesting. We'll come back to that. For now, let's just go ahead and add the boolean to what we're doing. That way it gives us options later on. Yeah, and we'll say is locally owned. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll check our user. Yep, we want to import that. Owner is null. Yeah, we want it to be null if we're not, and then we'll do the same thing. We're just going to check is locally owned, and we'll get our local user. If, let's see, sharing stage, instance manager, get local user. Okay. And then our sync source, add object. So sync source, that just goes back down. That's also a protected field as well, and that's really like our sync root. Essentially, let's see, I believe that it gets it from the sharing stage. When the sharing stage sets up, it gets the sync object root, and essentially that's what that is. Let's see here. Then we're going to add our object, and this gets, let's see, it has a sync object and a user parameters. So we'll do our spawn object and our user, or owner, sorry. Okay, so that should be good. I know we're kind of like halfway through this, but I'm kind of over on time. I went about an hour and a half this time, which is pretty good. But I'm trying to keep these kind of bite-sized pieces, and I'll probably edit this down a little bit later. So yeah, before I finish up, let's also add our boolean here. Is locally owned. Alright. And one more boolean. Okay. So one of the reasons why I'm using this class to call back into our prefab manager is because I just want to have a way to figure out where our prefab manager is. And I might actually make this a singleton. I kind of had talked about that before, because what I wanted to do was be able to get this prefab spawner from wherever in any of our other classes and then get it. But because we can't make our prefab spawn manager a singleton, I just want to have a reference to it and get it. There's other ways to do it. You could get component, or you could like search the whole scene for it, but that can be performance costly. So having these static references is a lot better than having to search the scene, and setting it up yourself is a lot better as far as performance goes. And we could also have different types of spawned objects later on. I'll probably get into that in the next episode, and I think I'll wrap it up for today. So thanks for joining, guys. We'll go over next week. We'll probably go over finishing the rest of this, and we'll actually start sending and receiving messages. I hope you guys got a little bit better understanding of some of the basics of the sharing service and how things are getting spawned. And we'll get into a little bit more about instantiating and removing from the network. So until next week, thanks guys.